Kia ora, Aotearoa, and hello world. You are listening to the Ya Na podcast, the official podcast of the New Zealand Skeptics. I'm Bronwyn Rideout, and with me are my co-hosts, Mark Honeychurch.
Hey.
And Katrina Borthwick.
Hello.
This episode promises to be as thought-provoking as it may be controversial and possibly upsetting to some. Katrina, you've explored the flawed application of social science in the family court system, while Mark pokes a few holes into the bad science that permeates the Masculinist Evolution New Zealand website, otherwise known as the MENZ website. And I'm just here bringing in the Halloween energy with something of a palate cleanser from our New Zealand Skeptical History project.
You dress that up so well, Bronwyn. You make it sound like it wasn't just you last-minute copy and pasting from a spreadsheet.
There's no shame. And that was the whole point of the Skeptical History, that we could draw on it at the last minute for an article or a newsletter. But anyways, for people who are listening on the Sunday or the Monday that this podcast is released, we do tend to record the Wednesday or Thursday following the release of the newsletter. And just so you know, we're recording maybe about 2 days before Halloween. So we do have a couple of seasonally appropriate items. We'll start off with Mark. I guess first you have some UFO books to rehome.
Yes. Are UFOs traditionally connected to Halloween? I guess they probably are these days. People can dress as anything, can't they?
Yeah, I think it's sort of, the space age, atomic age,
Okay, no, that sounds cool, and alien abductions are pretty scary. But yes, so we've had an offer from one of our members. I'm possibly going to butcher the name, but I presume the J at the beginning is a Y, so I think it's Jan Fika de Bok. Been a long-time member, and apparently collected over 600 UFO books doing some research in order to give a series of presentations at our conference. So these books are not being used anymore, and we've been offered them. Sadly, we don't have room for them. I certainly don't here in my study. And the Rationalists, where we have previously put our initial library many years ago, and the recent donation from Jim Ring, they can't take it either. So they are already pretty much at capacity. In order to accept our more recent donation to them, they were giving books away. They were getting rid of some of the older books and some of the less useful books, and some of the duplicates that they had they were getting rid of to make room for Jim Rings. So they do not have room for 650 UFO books. We have possibly an offer of somebody who's willing to take it. The Center for Inquiry in the US has one or more libraries. They have a librarian, and I've just sent one email to him, and I've had a response back saying that they are cautiously interested, but they want to know, what do we think the shipping costs are going to be, and what condition are the books in. So that may or may not work, but we'd love to hear from you if you have any other ideas of where a book collection of this size and this specialty, UFOs, would find a nice home. If you know of anywhere, especially if they're willing to pay the shipping, because I think it might be more than we can afford, or if it's New Zealand and local and I can put them in the back of my car and drive them there, then please let us know. We'd love to hear your ideas. Hopefully, if nothing else works out, and if the CFI are keen, we might be shipping them to America. And for me, at least, and I presume for Jan as well, the big thing is that they go somewhere where they're going to be used. They become an active resource that people actually go and find and get the books that they want out of this collection so that they can do their research. So really hope we can find somewhere for that, but please let me know if you've got any interesting ideas on where they could go.
What does 650 books look like?
It's a lot. Like the Jim Ring books that turned up at Rationalist House was like 30 of those, the large paper boxes.
Oh.
It was like 30, 35 of those. And I think that wasn't as many as 650 books. So it's probably a couple of pallets worth, I'd imagine.
My husband's a war gamer, so we have no space.
But then, sort of sticking onto the topic of UFOs, now that we have our website up, which has all of our articles from the newsletter, we are getting a little bit more attention and requests coming in from students, from all sorts of people wanting to talk to the skeptics. And Mark, you were speaking to a undergrad quite recently about skepticism and UFOs and all that stuff. Do you want to tell the audience a little bit more about that?
Yeah, we had a media request, and it was It was an interesting one. As you say, our website at articles.skeptics.nz is up and running, and all our articles are up there, right up to the latest newsletter. I just have to run a little bit of code every fortnight to do an import of the new stuff. But it does mean that when you search for UFOs and NZ, this website will tend to come up, and we are getting quite a bit more correspondence than we used to based on people searching for these things and thinking that we might be the group. I'm not sure with this one whether we are. It seems like, and this is a graphic design project, but it seems from the questions that I was sent, like maybe this is a bit more credulous than the skeptics would be. So the questions were things like, can you tell me a bit about how you got started in this line of work, UFO investigation? What first inspired you to start investigating UFOs, paranormal phenomena / life beyond Earth? What is one of the most compelling cases or experiences you've come across during your research? What's the most credible UFO sighting? What do you say as a skeptic to a question like that? What is the most credible UFO sighting? It's like, well, I guess I could probably list one or two, but they're still not very credible, right? I mean, they're still, if it's a UFO, it's we don't know what it is, and nobody knows what it is, and jumping to the conclusion that it's aliens is way premature. So yeah, it was a weird one, but I tried my best to answer the questions well, and I tried to think about, what would be a good skeptical perspective that doesn't make us look like fuddy-duddies, but also hopefully doesn't allow us to be misquoted. I don't want it to be that, half a sentence makes it look like we think that aliens are coming to visit us. And yeah, I managed to get in a mention of the $100,000 prize as well. So at the very end, the last question was, how do you usually investigate or verify reports or phenomena? And I just walked through the process that we have in place for, setting up a protocol for testing these things, and how we have a prize that people can win if we invite them and they can prove that they have any kind of supernatural or paranormal ability. So yeah, it was nice to answer. Hopefully this student gets to understand through my answers what skepticism is, and that we're not, just because there's a bunch of UFO articles on our website, it doesn't mean that we're a UFO believing group. Quite the opposite.
That's like someone's asked ChatGPT to generate a list of organisations or something and to send these questions to, and we've showed up.
Maybe. I mean, given that the site's not been up for that long, if GPT is already being trained on our articles, that's really good. I'm happy with that. I think GPT probably needs a bit more skepticism in its life, so hopefully we're doing a good job there.
We might be getting a few emails, though, if that's the case.
Yeah. If it is people actually searching Google and Google bringing up our articles website, then that's also very much a win.
Yay.
Now, Mark, you don't get to step away just yet.
No,
yeah, definitely. Well, you clearly did a lot of stuff around the week of Halloween. Because as I said at the top of the show, I'm bringing in the fluff piece this week. I'm not talking a multi-part series about cults just yet. But I had quite a lot of marking. It's the end of trimester, and Mark was very gracious to let me do another week in skeptical, or fortnight in skeptical history, so to speak.
Oh, I wasn't that gracious at 8 p.m. on a Sunday evening. I think I was a little bit honest in letting you know how I felt about it.
Gracious.
Awesome. Okay, if you think that was gracious, I'm doing really well.
Yes. So I've just sort of picked out some appropriately spooky bits of history, so to speak. So on October 28th, 2022 was a doubly relevant date for skeptics in New Zealand, or specifically for this skeptic, as in me. So Chris McKinnell, who is the grandson of American ghost hunters / paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren, who I spoke about, or who I wrote about a few weeks ago, he actually had visited New Zealand, and he joined one of the ghost hunter groups for a ghost hunt at a hotel. And if you watch the late installment of the Conjuring movie series, you might expect, if you hear about Ed and Lorraine Warren's grandson, that he might be someone who's in his late 30s, early 40s, given the ages of those characters in those movies. However, McKinnell's actually in his 50s, potentially even 60s, because all the characters have actually been made about 20 to 30 years younger for the movies. So Chris is actually the son of the Warrens' only daughter, Judy, and he comes from her first marriage to her first husband. He is not the son of Tony Spira, who is Judy's current husband and who's the one who took over the New England Society for Paranormal Research from the Warren family. He's the one whose character is portrayed in that last movie series. So I did talk a little bit about the shenanigans of the Nesper and of Tony Spira a couple of months ago ago, particularly when one of the investigators associated with Nesper died suddenly while on tour with the possessed or so-called possessed doll Annabelle. And I don't know necessarily what the true relationship is between Spera and Chris McConnell is, like what it's like in real life, but I have seen social media posts where McKinnell has been quite critical about Annabelle being toured. Like, he makes it sound like, yes, this doll's possessed, this doll's dangerous, when it's just a Raggedy Ann doll.
His perspective is not, it's all silly, that doll's just a doll, but it's dangerous to be touring this doll.
Yeah, exactly. So just sort of keeping an eye on that, because maybe it's the Warrens and this film being in the news at the moment, or what's doing pretty well in the box office, but also one of the houses that was associated with the first Conjuring film, which was the Perrin home. There's been a lot of controversy about it being for sale and who's going to buy it, and it was supposed to be put up for auction. So I might actually do a bit of a mini article about that for the next newsletter, because it's just a lot of hard feelings about these haunted house tours in the US, people being priced out of it because people who own these buildings are charging thousands of dollars for ghost hunters to come. And often the people who can afford it are, influencers, people who will do maybe a little bit of content and do all these contracts. So there's a bit of upset around that.
Oh my God, I've always thought that the New Zealand skeptics shouldn't buy a building because it can be an albatross around your neck having to look after a building and service it. But if we bought a haunted house and rented it out and made money from the credulous, is that ethical? I'm tempted. Like, if it could make good money, that would be nice.
There's people who do this as part of debunking. Like, could we actually have debunking tours?
Yeah, I mean, the tour we talked about last year on the podcast we
had a great time on that.
That was a lot of fun, and just playing with the equipment was really good. Offering a skeptical angle while also having a claimed haunted house and making good money out of it. Ooh, I'm going to put a business case together, and we can all vote on it at this weekend's committee meeting.
Or maybe for our AGM, which may be coming up in December. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. But also, on that same day, in that same year, we also had Radio New Zealand publish their piece about Haydn and discussing or summarizing some of the general complaints that were available at that time regarding the emotional, physical, and sexual abuse there and the connection to the International School of Temple Arts. And I have to say, quite sadly, at present, it really does remain the only critical piece of news published in New Zealand by a either mainstream or not New Zealand-based media outlet. Not even Reality Check Radio is interested, Yeah. And that's really frustrating considering the piece that came out from New York Magazine just a few months ago. So there is global interest. So why is New Zealand media dropping the ball?
Yeah, especially when we have Haydn on our doorstep, right?
Exactly. Something interesting happening on October 30th, 1977, involved Uri Geller. He was supposed to have a show at the Christchurch Town Hall that day, but they canceled at the last minute. Uri Geller, he's sort of a self-proclaimed psychic, and maybe for people of a certain age bracket, they would have known him for trying to bend spoons with his mind, but we all know he wasn't bending them with his mind. He was just using a little bit of friction, a little bit of heat, and making cheap metal
and
a little bit flexible.
Pushing them on the edge of a table as well. That's part of it, is putting it in your palm and just resting your palm against a table. If you can do it right, it's very cool. It looks like a very cool trick. I've done it once well in front of a friend, and I don't want to ever do it again because I don't want to do it badly, but I pulled it off well. It was so cool.
It also seems that one of his tricks in the 70s was also fixing watches. So I found an ad that was in the press, and it's saying bring your old watches as well. He didn't, despite having all these skills, his precognitive abilities really did fall short, because on that same day they canceled the show because fewer than a quarter of tickets have been sold for his performance.
And that's why he cancelled then, because he didn't sell enough tickets and didn't think it was worth it.
Yeah.
Oof, that seems a bit off. Still give the people that paid a show.
Now, Mark, this is where you get to shine, because you are a part of skeptical history in more ways than one. What happened also on the 30th on that same day, but in 2018, there was 1,000-person strong protest on the steps of Parliament that day, arguing that New Zealand was a Christian nation and that the then Speaker of the House, who was Trevor Mallard at the time, had no authority to remove Jesus from the parliamentary prayer.
So on that day, I organised a counter-protest where not 1,000, but 15 people turned up, and we protested basically arguing that, yes, Jesus should be put back in the prayer, but also every other god should be put in that prayer. That, we shouldn't pick favorites. And so we had a bunch of plans basically arguing for Thor and Cthulhu and Zul and all the other gods we could think of, that they all needed to be put into the prayer, that it should be crammed full, because we've got to be fair to everybody, right? And it was a fun time. We had one journalist wrote about it and said that we were heckling the people at the protest. We were not. We were outside the Parliament grounds on the pavement, just enjoying ourselves, chanting a little bit and waving our signs. But it was a fun little counter protest and a nice day, even though it was wet and rainy. And I think I spoke on the TV for a few seconds about it.
And then for Halloween, October 31st, you took your kids trick-or-treating in 2017, and they received a track from Ray Comfort's Living Waters Ministry. I mean, explain to me, though, like, what is it about New Zealanders and not, like, shelling out for the good tracks, like the chick tracks or, like, the plastic fetuses? Like,
yeah,
why?
It's a bit disappointing, isn't it? Like, I guess if it wasn't for Jack Chick, like, a Ray Comfort tract would be cool. But you're right, the fact that chick tracts exist, and if anybody doesn't know what they are, you have to look them up online. There's a whole documentary about trying to figure out who was behind it that's well worth watching. I ordered off Trade Me a while ago a chick tract that someone was selling for the price of postage anyway, because it's like, I need to own one of those. But you're right, it's an also-ran. I mean, a comfort tract is not the same thing, but a tract in this case is basically, it's just a pamphlet, and this was a pamphlet, talking about why you shouldn't be Halloweening, and you shouldn't, I think, you don't want to go to hell, and you need to believe so you can go to heaven. So it was trying to scare kids to believe, and it's a thing I think that happens a lot more in the States, is Christians basically saying, no, the treat that I've got isn't, it's me saving you for eternity by giving you a pamphlet.
I don't know. I kind of feel that it's a little bit more prominent in New Zealand because a lot of Kiwis, even like more secular Kiwis, are like, they hate it for the commercialism. They hate it for the junk food. But that being said, I do feel like there's a little bit more outward celebration of these alternative celebrations. I mean, I wrote about it last year or maybe the year before about these light parties or saints and angels parties that are supposed to be going on. I see a little bit more of that in New Zealand than I did in North America.
Yeah, the Christian alternatives that are offered so that your kids aren't sucked in by demonic forces. I mean, over here, I guess it's not, like, it's nowhere near as big, right? Halloween and trick-or-treating, like, at least in my area, the kids know which are the good streets. There are certain streets that kind of have a reputation for a lot of the houses having treats, and so they aim for those ones and kind of stay away from all the other areas. I guess if you've got a street that isn't known for it and only 1 in 30 houses has something, it'd be a bit depressing walking all that way and not getting much.
And that we feel like very Kiwi. You got to work hard to get the treats, right?
If you knew there was a street where every house had them, I mean, you'd go there, right? You'd have to.
And then I guess my final date for this piece, Mark, you had seen David Icke, but again, we kind of figured out that this date would have been a little bit too early for you because David Icke came to New Zealand in November 6th, 2011. And he gave a talk in Auckland. But you saw the one in 2014. You and Tim had a bit of a mish to get up there.
We did, yeah. So, yeah, I missed the first David Icke talk. I guess that was before I was part of the skeptical movement. I kind of joined, I think, late 2012. But, yeah, so 2014, the second time he came over, yeah, I myself and Tim's boyfriend at the time, we all drove up. But on the way, I got rear-ended. So my car was a write-off. But being a write-off didn't stop me driving it from Wellington to Auckland and back because I was not going to miss David Icke. I drove it 1,600 kilometers, and then when I got back, it was scrapped. That was the end of that car, but it lasted for that weekend, and I was very happy with that. David Icke spoke for like 10, 11 hours. For the money, which was like, I think $70 for a ticket, we got a lot of David Icke. The per hour cost was pretty awesome.
So enough of the preliminary banter. It's time to get into some of the heavy stuff. So, Katrina, with this week's newsletter, you were writing about some of the pseudoscience or bad science that's proliferating throughout the family court system. Would you care to tell listeners a little bit about what you wrote about this week?
Yeah, so I stumbled on this research that was published this year by Carrie Leonetti. So she's based in the University of Auckland School of Law, and she looked at how judges, lawyers, and psychologists use social science in the court. And this particular paper was published in the Indiana Health Law Review, so it's a paper. And in that, it concludes that in most cases in which lawyers, judges and psychologists in the court referred to academic research or social science literature, the description of the literature was inaccurate and the application wasn't right either. So quite a bit of burn there in terms of the conclusions. So I kind of had to know where this was coming from. So the first thing I looked at was the author, Carrie Leonetti, and she's an associate professor at University of Auckland. I couldn't find anything that indicated there should be any concerns with her. According to the University of Auckland website, she is internationally recognised expert on the intersection of science and law, which is really interesting because you're sort of bringing those two disciplines together, and I guess as you should in the court if you are using social science in that environment. She did write quite a few articles in Newsroom in 2023 on these sorts of topics, and in October she weighed in on the Thomas Phillip case, so that's that went bush with his 3 children and unfortunately was later shot by the police. And she was talking in that article about the failure of the family court to keep victims safe. And in that she talked also about a group of volunteers called the Backbone Collective, and they wrote a report on the family court system based on a survey they did in 2017. So I will just say volunteers, not scientists, and survey, all those sorts of things. But there is a piece of work out there that they did. So what Leonette was, she's done a piece of research looking into 29 cases in the family court and going through them in detail and looking at the mentions of science there. She's done some other research that criticises the family court, including the need for psychologists acting in the family court to be regulated, and also criticising children's views being disbelieved in parenting orders. And that is interesting. But even more interesting, there's a paper which appears not to have been released yet, but it has the title Spectral Evidence, a comparison the evidence of witchcraft in the Salem witch trials and evidence of parental alienation in the New Zealand family court. So she's drawing some sort of parallel there. I could only get the abstract for that, so I'm waiting for this article to come out because I really want to read that piece of research and see what it says. It has such a tantalising title, doesn't it?
It does sound like it'll be fascinating, and I couldn't find it there either, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's showing as pending, and I think that means it sort of exists somewhere, but it hasn't quite made it into daylight yet. In terms of what it does, it compares, as you expect, the practices and proofs and procedures in both of those environments, the Salem witch trials and the New Zealand family court. It says there's some striking parallels between the accusations involved and the accusations of parental alienation in the family court today. And I will get back to that topic of parental alienation and explain it a little bit more. As you would have gathered from her research and all of those little pieces of things that she's published, she focuses on miscarriages of justice, scientific evidence, forensic psychiatry, and the role that those human factors play in the decisions of judges, juries, and lawyers. So she's interested in seeing how the social science that goes in affects the decisions that the courts make and the people involved in those courts. It's kind of left me in a weird place because I was kind of looking at the title of that Salem witch trials, and it's not normally that you see the word witch sort of in the same sentence as, someone who is a internationally recognised expert. And so I was sort of sitting there going, how seriously do I take this? But so there's an emotive tone coming through in her material. She's done this research. She's also done a submission on basically the same topic. And It is coming through quite emotionally, I guess, for someone with a law background, which is a little bit surprising. And I guess I would add the caveat that this research she's done is 29 cases and they're in high conflict situations. So in terms of the applicability, it may not apply to other situations. It's just 29 cases. The themes that she's reporting are consistent with the themes coming through from other sources, which is reassuring. And I think when I start to look at the topic, I can kind of get why someone would have strong opinions and could potentially really care about the outcomes. And so some of the language that might be a little bit surprising for lawyers and some of these exciting titles might be coming through. You know, if someone really cared about this and obviously the outcomes for children involved in the family court. So paper's a long one, 70 pages, the 29 cases. Obviously, it doesn't give any personal details, so it doesn't disclose who these people were, so it just has to describe the findings. She makes 4 key findings. So in the cases she studied, she said that the courts often used vague research claims. So they said, the research shows, or something like that. They quite often had a bias towards quoting particular people and particular research, and the same research kept coming up. And so that reoccurring favourite sources was the third thing. And then there was really a lack of genuine peer-reviewed social science sources used in the courts, or even to draw on, so that kind of throw them back into using their favourite scientists, which is essentially about the research of about 4 people keep coming up all the time. So in terms of being non-specific, that sort of someone might stand up in court and say, the literature is saying, studies show, but they don't actually tell you what the literature is or what the study is. So someone that's sitting there as an expert and saying that. And who's doing this? Well, the psychologists that cited research, 55% of them, people mentioning research were psychologists, 20% judges, and everyone else was less than that. So it was scientists sitting there, psychologists, that were making these vague references. In terms of when the literature was dealing with family violence, there was a bias towards the perpetrator. She found that in 77% of cases, so that's not just a low-level violence, that's a big bias. When I was talking about this concept of parental alienation, which I do promise I will explain, 67% supported, so 2/3 on that. So parental alienation is where a child becomes estranged from one parent, so not sort of relating to or talking to them, as a result of actions or the psychological manipulation of the other parent. So in other words, they've sort of poisoned the well in terms of that parent, and so the relationship is now damaged to the point where the child is estranged. Only problem is that is not accepted as a diagnosable condition. There's no such condition as parental alienation. And the sorts of behaviours described are quite common. So it's actually quite common for people who end up in litigation in the court. So we're talking most pointy of cases in terms of the relationships breaking down, litigation. Most, likely there's going to be things going on like family violence are more likely to occur in these kind of cases. But parental estrangement is rare. And the issue that arises is that someone who is an abusive parent might use the concept of parental alienation to gain custody. They might say the mother or the father is poisoning the well, is alienating me from my child. That's abuse. I need to have them. This is all lies, and so I should get custody because otherwise I'm going to lose contact with my child and be estranged due to the actions of the other parent. So in Leonetti's submission, and this was on the review of the Evidence Act 2006, she talks about this. She says only a small portion of cases end up in litigation. She talks about the fact that they tend to involve a perpetrator of family violence and a victim. The courts don't do a good job of picking up family violence, and they tend to overemphasise the risk of false allegations. So they make the assumption, sometimes she's saying, that what people are saying where there is an allegation of abuse, that it might not be true. So that means this parental alienation suddenly becomes the thing that can be looked at. And so there is this concept of parental alienation and parental alienation syndrome. Now, the difference between those two is parental alienation is what happens. It's one parent is taking manipulative actions to estrange that child from the other parent. Parental alienation syndrome is what is observed, the behaviour that's observed in the child. So their rejection of one particular parent, and they take that rejection behaviour and then they draw the conclusion that the other parent must have alienated that child. Now, the issue arises where the alienation has occurred because that child has been abused by that parent and is therefore rejecting that parent and not wanting contact with that parent because that parent has abused them psychologically or physically. But if they apply parental alienation syndrome, all they see is a child rejecting their parent, their accounts may be discounted, and in fact, the other parent may be reluctant to bring them up because they may be accused of parental alienation by saying that the other parent is an abuser. So you end up in a situation where someone's essentially being diagnosed with a condition that doesn't exist based on the behaviour of the child, but not actually through any evidence that appears.
It's like topsy-turvy, isn't it? It's like you're seeing something in front of you, and then the idea is that the opposite is true.
Yeah.
That, you'd expect it's much more likely that a child would be alienated from a parent because that parent has done something awful, not because the other parent has pitted them against them. The more likely, simple solution is just that the kid doesn't like that parent. The parent's done something bad.
Yeah, and my unscientific opinion is that kids can be pretty forgiving in situations where one parent is abusive, and there may be a bit of Stockholm kind of syndrome behaviour going on there, but actually it takes quite a lot to drive a wedge between a child and their parent, but it can happen. I mean, I think if you're in a situation where things are split up and it's got pretty acrimonious, you would need to probably make a real conscious effort not to ever say anything in front of your child. And there's bound to be a few slip-ups. But we're not talking about this. This research was done in the courts, so you're looking at a bit of a different demographic there, and there are decisions falling out of the family courts, such as custody decisions, travel decisions, those kind of things, whether someone can be relocated, a child can be relocated, who will have access to see that child and who will not. People are making money off this. There's several programs in the US saying that they're applying something called reunification therapy to address parental alienation, and they are usually be in contact with the protective parent and essentially engage in brainwashing, as far as I can see. I will just be careful here because when I was stumbling around the internet, I did find some offerings of reunification therapy in other countries that it wasn't going that far. So there are people that just want families to reunite. We're not talking about that. I'm talking about the stuff that's directly addressing parental alienation as a concept. So what are the other experts saying? So the American Psychological Association, the Association of Clinical Psychologists in the UK, and the New Zealand Psychological Society have all voiced their opinions on this. They felt it was important enough to talk about, and they have said that parental alienation syndrome basically lacks science. There's no scientific validation, and even the World Health Organization has never recognised parental alienation as a diagnosis, and says it's a judicial term. It's used in the courts, and there's no evidence-based healthcare intervention specifically for parental alienation. So if someone is saying they're offering a service to address this, there's actually no science behind it. There is no methodology to address this. New Zealand Psychological Society made a submission to the Review of Family Violence Law in 2015. In a nutshell, they said they were really concerned. This is deep concern about using the context of the construct of parental alienation syndrome. There's no scientific evidential basis. It was something coined by Richard Gardner in the US in the early 1980s, and he subsequently trained thousands of judges and lawyers in the US and in New Zealand. He claimed that most of the children who reported sexual abuse were making it up, fabricating it. More than 500 studies, according to the New Zealand Psychological Society, have been conducted into this syndrome, and none of them have been able to reproduce the 8 characteristics that Gardner says exist. So it's just simply not reproducible, which means that it just can't be science. To boot, the Psychological Society was concerned that Gardner's recommendations were that the mother, so it gets a bit gendered here, the mother reporting violence and abuse should be encouraged to stay with the abusive father, and she should be helped over her anger, and the child should be placed in the father's care in cases of separation. So children are threatened with being removed from their mother's care if they persist with their reports of abuse, and mothers are threatened with having children removed from their care if they continue to report. So that's what I'm talking about before. You get caught in this chicken and egg thing where, well, you haven't reported any abuse, so it must be parental alienation. Well, the reason I haven't reported it is because I say bad things about the other parent, then you're going to think that I'm engaging in parental alienation. How do you get out of that? You can't. So that's the problem. It's relying on the court and the judges and psychologists in court to pick this up. So, favoured sources. So 4 names keep coming up: Witcher Borshak, Amy Baker, Barbara Jo Fiedler, and Nicholas Bala. None of these people have produced peer-reviewed work, and none of them are scientists working in mainstream academic psychology. Some of them, there's at least one clinical psychologist there, but there's actually a real difference between someone working in research and someone working in practice, right? Okay, so Witcher Borshak he's a psychologist, and he has his own website and his name, and he's selling his books, and they've got titles like Divorce Poison, How to Protect Your Family from Bad-Mouthing and Brainwashing, and he was involved in developing a family bridges workshop, which is kind of that therapy I was talking about, and it encouraged people to live with the children to live with a rejected parent on the assumption that the child's rejection was. The second one, Amy Baker, she's PhD in developmental psychology. Again, a website in her own name. She, directly under her name, it says she's a parental alienation coach, researcher, author. She's got 10 books for sale there, including Surviving Parental Alienation, A Journey of Hope and Healing. Apparently she's written 120 academic articles. I didn't dig down into the swamp that might be. But again, parental alienation right there. If she was in science, then that should not be there. Barbara Jo Fiedler, clinical psych, also co-authored some books, but concerningly, she's sort of provided content for like the Men and Families website, and she seems to have had her viewpoint adopted by a number of men's support organisations, including Men's Group, MENZ Group, which Mark will talk a bit about later. I sort of scoped around just to see whether the women's support groups were kind of quoting this material, and I could not find any mention of them mentioning parental alienation in a positive way. I did find one website criticising it, but that was about it. Not a very scientific thing to Google around, but it certainly looked like there was a bit of a bias for that construct to be used by the men's support groups. Final person, Nicholas Bala, Canadian law expert. So he's actually got a master's in law from Harvard, but again, he has a focus on parental alienation alongside parental separation issues. So again, all of these people seem to have quite a bias towards these concepts. So it's not surprising that when they're quoted in court, that the court evidence tends to have a bias towards parental alienation. The final issue is there's not really enough out there. Sweeping generalisations, as I mentioned before. But there's an example in the 2015 Psychological Society submission around situational violence. So this is a little bit different to, this isn't about parental alienation, but it's this new concept and this truth, I would put in commas, quote marks, air quotes, whatever you like, around situational violence. And these truths are circulated and they're not supported by evidence. So what I'm about to say is a bunch of hokey. It is not true. So one of the points is that an intimate partner violence has no correlation with child abuse and unfit parenting. What happens between the parents does not affect the children is the next truth. A woman must facilitate access to the children's father, regardless of danger. My personal favourite.
Yeah, that one seems so starkly wrong, doesn't it? Jeez.
Yeah. If the woman has sought physically to defend herself from violence by the father, the case is one of mutual violence, and violence should accordingly be disregarded as an issue.
Yeah, not a good argument.
Yeah, so self-defense means now we should just ignore the whole thing.
Cancels each other out.
And
No.
Maximum contact with both parents is essential and beneficial for all children.
Yeah.
Particularly where there is psychological, physical violence. And also, just add to that, the Psych Society says there's actually no such thing as situational violence. Violence is, well, violence, not categorize it that way. So this is just sort of messing with people's heads a bit, I think. So these sort of generalizations and these truths, and you can end up with things applied in situations where they don't apply. So there was one case for a New Zealand case where the research presented was based on a cooperative low conflict separated families. So, people that are kind of worked it out. The lawyer representing the father didn't disclose that. And then they applied it to a situation where there was violence. You can't do that. Your research needs to be based on the population characteristics that you're going to apply it to. You can't take low conflict, more amicable situations and assume that everything's going to work the same way in a situation where you've got safety issues and violence and so on. So I guess in summary, yes, there's a caution, low number of cases, but it is consistent with what's going on. It does look like there's cherry picking of evidence and people picking the things that suit their argument, which is something that, people tend to pay lawyers to do. They don't people to go to court and represent them and bring scientists in that are going to cause them problems. But those scientists should be giving evidence based on the research that's out there as well. So these themes aren't new. They were raised by the New Zealand Psychological Society in their submission in 2015, and they based their submission on concerns that are held internationally, so UK, US. And it's 2025 now, 10 years after that submission was made. So I can kind of get why in Leonetti's submissions and articles there's a bit of emotion going into those, and I think frustration, because, if this is what's happening, it's certainly going to have an impact on young people's lives, and it needs a closer look.
The Wikipedia page for parental alienation looks really good. Like you said, Katrina, there are people who are very passionate about this. It looks like those people have made sure that the Wikipedia page is long and well-sourced, and definitely makes it clear that this idea of parental alienation is theorized, but not by any means.
Yeah. That's cool. Now, I was really interested in the MENZ actually stood for something. I didn't realise it was an acronym, and it seemed like a bit of a jumble.
Yeah, so the MENZ website, I have the feeling it's a backronym. So the acronym was given meaning after they came out with the name for the website. But as we've said, it's menz.org.nz, menz.org.nz. Please don't go there unless you have a good reason to. It's not a great site in my personal opinion.
It looks like it's done in the 80s or something.
Yeah, the man who built it is supposedly a web admin, or web slave as he calls himself, John Potter. It looks like he recently had technical problems he fixed, so he's not totally useless. The whole site, I would probably argue, shouldn't exist. I don't think it's useful. I don't think it's helpful. I am not coloured by the fact that on the front page, and I think every page actually of the site, in the right sidebar, there is a whole section that basically complains about the New Zealand skeptics. This is not why I am commenting on this. I have been looking at this men's website years before they decided to start having a go at us. So this has been on my radar for a long time and has been a long time coming. But yeah, so the men's website is all about men's rights. It's about men's rights activism, or as we said with the acronym, masculinist evolution, which is a bit of a mouthful. And basically the website says that it's for news and discussion about New Zealand men, fathers, family law, divorce, courts, protests, gender politics, and male health. And what I noticed years ago when I first looked at this site, and I think possibly it's even getting worse, is that not only does it seem to be a lot of woman-hating, it's not just lifting men up, a lot of it is very anti-women, but on top of that, there's a lot of pseudoscience that's ending up on this website, and it's not being challenged, and there's probably a good reason for this. So John Potter, as I mentioned, is the web slave, as he calls himself, and he's basically written that it's handoff. He says that there's no moderation by the administrator. It's a fire and forget. He's made the website and anybody can comment. They can do what they like. He has a rules page that says that posts that are inaccurate, abusive, vulgar, hateful, harassing, obscene, sexually oriented, threatening, rude, mean, nasty, or invasive of a person's privacy are not permitted. But then in the About page, where it talks about how he's not actively administering, it says that he will only remove material if it's been published unlawfully or in breach of copyright. So he has a whole bunch of rules about what people shouldn't post, but if they do post it, he won't take it down. And this seems a bit silly. So what I did was I looked at, well, what are the articles like? You know, are the articles well-reasoned? Do they have good science? There's quite a lot of articles. There's a lot of articles, a lot of fluff, a lot of stuff that, as I said, it's kind of anti-women. It seems like their idea of how you build men up is by attacking women, pointing out how women aren't great. It's not very nice to read, but a bunch of the articles in the middle of this site, and I went back maybe 3 years in my looking into what was written on there, a bunch of it was just so pseudoscientific, such nonsense. It was so obviously wrong that it was like, well, this is fair game for a skeptical article because this is really ridiculous. And the first one was, the beginning of the article said, shock discovery. Anytime a woman has sex with a man, she retains his DNA in her brain. It then went on to talk about research from Seattle University and the reasoning, and then the author's personal opinion at the end, which was, my ex must have at least 50 or maybe 100 different male DNA in her brain, always thought there was something wrong with her thought process. Which is just a shitty comment, to be honest. Shock horror. This is not what the research that they're talking about is about. I deliberately did not have any links to the men's website in my article, but I have the links in my Google Doc where I wrote this article. And if we click on that link and have a look on the men's website, the article it links to where it got this from is from Natural News. And Natural News is by Mike Adams, who is a nightmare for skeptics. This is a man who basically tries to do his own science away from the mainstream. Years ago, he tried to build this new lab where he bought a whole bunch of really expensive equipment that he didn't know how to use, and he used it to zoom in on chicken nuggets and show how evil they were and things like this. The guy sells supplements. He basically says, real science is dangerous, scientists are all lying to you, but trust me and my unproven supplements. And the site, thankfully, is a lot quieter these days. It got quite political a few years ago, but back in like the early 2010s, it was a big website selling like millions and millions of dollars worth of supplements to unwary people. So this is not a trustworthy place to get your news from. And sure enough, Natural News mangled the paper. The paper did not say that women end up with DNA in their brain whenever they have sex with a man. What they did was they looked for this really cool little thing where people can have tiny bits of external DNA hosted inside them, which is called microchimerism. And they looked at the brains of women. I think it was deceased women, so they'd had basically slices of brain from these women. They didn't know their history, but they looked at just a few, not many at all, 59 women, and they looked for a specific marker on the Y chromosome to see if in the sample of brain that they had, they could see this marker. And sure enough, in about half or so of the women in these brain samples, they found it. Now, they posited that what happened here was that these women would have had male children, and it was during the time that this male child was inside them that some of the child's DNA could have crossed the placenta, and Bronwyn, presumably that's a thing?
So, okay.
Is this going to be half an hour of explanation? Let's go for it.
If something crosses into the maternal blood stream, it's a medical emergency. It can kill you.
Okay, all right.
This is where you get amniotic fluid embolisms.
But we could imagine that a tiny bit of DNA might cross, and then the paper talks as well that apparently the chemistry of the blood-brain barrier of the woman changes during pregnancy, and maybe this means that that DNA can then cross again into the woman's brain. It's like, we went looking for Y chromosome markers in a woman's brain, we found it, and here's a whole bunch of supposition as to why. And the research is honest enough, as a lot of this research is, that it just says this is preliminary, more work is needed. And honestly, they probably, if anything, went a little bit too far in guessing that this was the pathway for it, rather than maybe that their equipment wasn't measuring properly, or that something else also tests positive for this chromosome that's explained by a totally different reason. False positive, badly calibrated machine. Who knows what's going on here? But the only thing they said was more research needed. And this is not where you can go from their hypothesis, very much a hypothesis, that if a woman has a male child, then maybe some of the DNA ends up in her brain. Absolutely not even what the paper was trying to say. So it's just so much stupid. It really hurt me to read that first one.
It feels like it's challenging that, you wouldn't marry someone unless they're a virgin kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's heading in that direction way.
But you can also see this trend in social media where you've seen a lot more comments about everyone should have a DNA test once the baby's born, so there's no confusion.
You don't want to be paying for someone else's child kind of nonsense.
This is part of the men's rights space, that women are inherently untrustworthy. They're going to lie about their past sexual history.
Double standard, we should be leaving that in the past. That does not belong in modern day society. All right, the next one was an article about Carol Adams, which started off saying, lunatic Carol Adams says eating meat by white men is patriarchy and gender and oppression. That's not what she said. I couldn't quite understand what she was saying when she talked in Parliament, but the end of this article, just totally out of the blue, suddenly, because it starts insulting her, so it's not totally out of the blue, actually. It says, Carol Adams is not pursued by 99.99% of males simply because she's not desirable. The facelift is long overdue, and for the sake of society, she needs to start thinking about retirement in a secure unit. I mean, this is just hateful commentary. This is not nice at all. And then finishes off with, if you are overweight of any gender, try a beef-only diet for 6 weeks. You will start to lose kgs within a week or two. Keep it up for 3 months and then move to a low-carbs diet. And again, I shouldn't have had to have done, but I did look this up just to make sure that the meat-only diet, or even more restrictive, the beef-only diet, isn't something that doctors are recommending, and they absolutely are not. Luke NZ on the internet is telling you to eat beef only. It turns out medical experts are saying, don't do that. Do not do a carnivore diet. This is not good for you in the long run. Yes, you might find that, as happens with a lot of diets, that changing your diet can be enough that for the first few weeks you lose weight and you might think that it's working. But in the long term, it can have serious health implications. So do not do it. I've listened to Jordan Peterson's daughter on a podcast trying to talk with people. I think she's got a whole podcast just about people on carnivore diets. And it is painful to listen to them talking about how, if they're on the beef only, this includes snacks. So your snack might be potato crisps made out of not potato, but cow. So somebody is slicing cow thin enough that you can make it a little bit like potato crisps. It's got to be such a boring diet. And it's dangerous as well, so don't do it. So that was the second one. The next one, it was just a post about politics. If I were the deep state and I wanted less families and population, there should be fewer families and population, but I'm being picky here, I would make laws to destroy men so they do not have children. If I were the deep state, I would allow false sex accusations from women, pay them huge sums of money for their statement, and virtually never prosecute if it was false. If I were the deep state, I wanted to know and take full control over what people spend their money on, I would take away cash and make all transactions electronic. Now, this is starting to sound like the flipping Rapture thing from a few weeks ago, the beast system, where everything is tracked. And the next one, if I were the deep state, I would place a near-field ID and tracker inside everyone's hand. This is flipping Rapture stuff. The Rapture is not coming. The Antichrist is not going to track us all and control our spending. But this deep state seems to be, it's either Illuminati or it's the Antichrist, and it's absolutely ridiculous. This is not a thing that's happening, and the idea that someone on this men's rights website is trying to tell everybody else on this site that the deep state is coming to track and control you all is just total nonsense.
It's a bit of a concern because presumably people are going to go here for some support and to get some useful information, and instead they get Armageddon, like stuff. Like, this is not what you need if you're just trying to work out how to sort out your custody case.
They're getting red-pilled, as it's called, and red-pilling, as far as skeptics are concerned, is not a good thing. You're not learning the reality of the world. The scales are not falling for your eyes and you get to see the truth. You're being fed a bunch of bullshit. Red-pilling is basically learning a bunch of crazy stuff that isn't true. And yeah, you're right. That, like, people are gonna, like, if they go there and they find this companionship and then they start being fed this, often people won't then have this knee-jerk reaction and walk away. It's like, but this is my community, and they'll start researching it more, and there is a good chance that they will end up believing this, even if they didn't come in believing any of it. All right, so the next one, I'm going to read the entire article because it's really short. Here we go. Puberty blockers. Follow the science, they say, but I haven't had time on this one. So the guy hasn't even read any of it. Okay. The second half of the article, in disguise, ? Population control, ? Eugenics, ? This is what's known as jacking off, just asking questions. It's where you try and get away with asking a question and then not having to deal with the consequences of the fact that your question is stupid. And there is such a thing as stupid questions, and these are stupid questions. Puberty blockers, I mean, the science is still out on how good they are. Obviously, they are helping a lot of people, a lot of children, but, the evidence is not great so far. I had to do a quick little bit of background research, and it looks like there are still questions about just how efficacious it all is, and the amount of good stuff versus the amount of bad stuff, and the quality of the research. A lot of the research has been biased in one direction or the other because people have an agenda. And so there's a lot more work that looks like it needs to be done. But nothing that I found anywhere that I read said that puberty blockers are eugenics, that this is an idea that they're trying to use puberty blockers to sterilize a bunch of people so that the population can be kept down. I mean, this is a Georgia Guidestones 500 million, the Great Reset. I mean, this is not reality. This is not what's going on. And the fact that someone thinks it is and thinks that they figured it out so well that everybody else needs to know about it, it's just nonsense.
Wouldn't you see people that are going through puberty? I mean, I know it happens for medical reasons and things like that, but if this actually was true, it should be something we see, right?
Well, you'd see them then not having children, and quite possibly with the lifestyles that people on puberty blockers go through, they might not be having children anyway. These are complex relationships, and there'd be many reasons why maybe they don't choose to. But as far as I understand, yes, we are not seeing an epidemic of people who've been on puberty blockers, and not just for gender issues. I mean, I guess there's a whole bunch of medical issues as well that people use puberty blockers for. And I don't believe we're seeing that this is sterilizing them, that none of them are having any children. If it was, we'd have known about it decades ago.
Well, the only time I've seen it is where it's to delay puberty because the person has a mental delay or mental impairment, which means they're not able to deal with a whole lot of the things that you go through when you reach puberty. So, especially if you're female, if someone's got the IQ of a 5-year-old, it's tricky, right? And so that's the only time I've seen it is the puberty blockers. It's not necessarily a permanent solution, it's just to stop things for a while so that they can get to the next developmental stage so that things align a little bit better. Or in one situation where they had terminal brain cancer, and it was a child, so it was too much going on at once.
Yeah, no need to go through that as well.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, so the next one is Green MP, Afiso Collins, who died, sadly, at the age of 49. The article, it first copy and pastes from One News, and then the person writing this article on the Men's website carries on by saying, not having followed the fortunes of Collins while being busy with other issues, I've only just read that he was Samoan, but did know he'd gravitated from Labour to the Greens. The immediate question, though, is why another younger man has just dropped dead. It's becoming all too common these days. The question will be asked, was he vaccinated? Now, I couldn't find out online whether he was vaccinated, but he was publicly promoting the Auckland vaccination drive during COVID. So I'm pretty sure he was enough of a pro-vaccine person that he would have got his own vaccine. I was hoping that during that event he might have got himself jabbed, but the only thing he talked about was he didn't want to be on social media doing anything because he was just too old for TikTok and this wasn't his thing. But yeah, it turns out basically that people have been asking questions, including an ex-All Black, Shane Christie, who harassed his widow outside the court asking her if he'd been vaccinated. But the big thing we know already is that the predictions that we were hearing from conspiracy theorists during COVID, that we were going to be dropping like flies for having been vaccinated, it's not happening. No, the vaccine was not dangerous, or at least it's so undangerous that the COVID was so much worse that the vaccine was definitely worth getting. Okay, the next one is... there's a whole bunch of things that were thrown out in this. It's just a list. It's a list of things. So it said things like the white ribbon slogan, prevention of violence against women. Men are excluded because it's thought they can only ever be considered the perpetrators. Does this have potential to cause a male suicide? There's a ministry for women, but no ministry for men. Serious crimes that women commit are treated and handled differently than men's crimes. So it's a whole bunch of these things that people, this person, this author thinks they're different for women than for men. And then he goes on to say, this is not an extensive list. You could probably think of many more yourself. They are all designed to destroy men's wealth, income, their child's relationship, take on an unfair burden of the tax liability to run the state, limit their options in life with allegations, regardless of the verdict. This is a bit paranoid. Even if these things were happening, the claim that they're designed to do this, it's another leap of faith. You need evidence, A, that these things are happening, and B, you need evidence that there's a reason that they're happening and that it's because people are trying to make men's lives harder. And the thing this article finishes with the bit that I really choked on, which is, could it all be about reducing the planet's population? To reduce the waste and save our planet, forcing men to not have children because the personal cost is too high. Again, population control, blah, 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 blah. No, this is not what's going on.
Forcing men not to have... I don't even know how they got there. Or are they killing them with the vaccination? Oh, no, I don't know.
Yeah, don't try and understand it.
Yeah.
But this is the kind of stuff that's being posted on this site. This is not reasoned argument. This is not factual articles. There's a bunch of stuff about men being treated badly or perceived as being treated badly, and I'd have concerns that we don't know enough about the case. We're hearing one side of the story with these. And often when I do look more into cases like this, especially when I see kind of people posting on Facebook, hey, you know, I'm, as a father, my wife is keeping me away from the children and this is really bad. You then look into that person and you find that there's a whole horrible history there, that this man is neglecting to say, not mentioning anything about. But then the ones that do talk about science, like I didn't find one post that had good information. It was either nothing to do with science, or when science was in there, it was horrific. It wasn't real science. It's all conspiratorial nonsense. And, just as a bonus, as I said in my article, I didn't really look at the comments. You know, I checked a few comments. It's hard to go through the comments on the Men's website because there is one guy called DJ Ward who posts so much prose. It looks like poetry. It's like short lines, but it doesn't rhyme, so it's not poetry, but everything is kind of like very short stanzas, and he's prolific. He writes so much. So to look for anybody else's comments, you have to kind of scroll past all of this guy's stuff that he's putting in there, and it looks very well written. I mean, he seems to write interestingly. Obviously, he's part of the men's rights movement. It doesn't gel with me. It looks bad, but he doesn't have typos. What he writes seems to be constructed well. But the one comment I found in the midst of this that I really had problems with, it was in response to a Jordan Peterson video where Piers Morgan was interviewing Jordan Peterson. I watched the whole interview just to try and get some context of what people were commenting about. And somewhere in the middle of that video, Jordan said that people with compassion are fascists, which is just ridiculous. But the comment that I found to this video was someone that wrote, and this was in response to something else that Jordan had said in this video, they wrote, "It's true young single men are underrepresented when it comes to government support and financial aid. We're expected to be fine on our own, while immigrants and women of colour get all the treatment." Which, again, there's no evidence for this. It's ridiculous. I feel sorry for this guy if he feels that's the case, but that is not the case. And trying to blame women and immigrants for his problems, that's not okay.
Yeah, and I think men should get support where they need it, and some men definitely experience domestic violence and all of that. So men should get support.
But that physical violence, it's not 50-50. And, again, you see stuff on this website about how come men don't have the same services that women have. They need less of those services because there are fewer incidences against men that are happening. There is a good reason why this is the case. So, yeah, the rest of the stuff that I saw, there was some stuff that was pro the NZD-SOS, New Zealand Doctors Speaking Out with Science, which was our group of anti-vaccine doctors who got together during COVID because they were all losing their licenses. There's a bunch of conspiratorial stuff about the United Nations and the World Health Organization. One thing it was only while writing this article that I realized was that all the bad comments, all the hateful stuff that I was reading, all the horrible things that were on that site, there was no pushback, or pretty much no pushback. Like, the other members weren't saying, whoa, hang on a minute, you're going too far here, you're just being mean to women. Everybody just seemed to be allowed to say what they wanted to say, no matter how hateful it was. With the only exception being a couple of times that I found an account that had been created, by the looks of things, just to poke fun at the men on this site. So there was a little bit of pushback from people that were just there to have a laugh and joke about these men on this site. Outside of that, the actual long-time members who were commenting all the time, none of them were pulling each other up. None of them were saying, well, hang on a minute, this post is nonsense, or your comment is hateful. They just let it all happen. And between the members not policing it themselves and John Potter not policing it at all, the website's a mess. It's an absolute mess, and I have pretty much no doubt it's doing much more damage than good. It'll be nice to see it off the internet one day. It'll be nice to see the day that we no longer have menz.org.nz, because it's not a useful resource for men in need. They're not offering that kind of help. It's just a bunch of men complaining about women.
Well, we're now at the end of a very lengthy episode, but before we say goodbye, it's just time for a quick membership corner. The next New Zealand Skeptics in Cyberspace is going to be November 7th, starting at 6 p.m. You can get the new link, which will be on Teams, Microsoft Teams. You'll be able to pick that up from our Facebook page or our Meetup page. Just remember, if you've been following the old Zoom link, we're not going to be using that anymore. We'll have a new one. For our in-person events, we have Wellington Skeptics in the Pub on Friday, November 14th at 6 p.m. We are still meeting at Chapman Taylor's Cafe and Inn on 113 Mulworth Street. It's a good time. It's a pretty decent value food and options for drinks. So come on in. We've actually been getting some new people showing up pretty regularly, which has been really nice. Bit of a change, hasn't it, Mark?
Yeah, I don't know whether it was the venue we'd been at for years that was keeping people away, but now we've moved venue. Maybe it's people at the other end of town. It's easier for them to get to. But yeah, we're getting a nice steady stream of new people coming in, which is great.
And then for the Auckland Skeptics, they will have their next Skeptics in the Pub on November 4th. That's also starting at 6:30 p.m. at the Dyson Fork. And drumroll, please, save the date. 2026, that's our 40th anniversary of organized skeptical activism in New Zealand. And our 2026 conference is shaping up to be a cracker one as well, because we will be joined by the team from Skeptics Guide to the Universe. This will be their third trip to the Southern Hemisphere, or at least their third trip to New Zealand, but it'll be their first time back since before the pandemic. They certainly are planning to potentially run maybe one or two of their own events outside the Skeptics conference. So if you can't join us for conference weekend, there will be another chance for you to catch up with your favorite American rogues. So get your leave request in and your travel booked for Christchurch the weekend of July 31st to August 2nd. Early bird tickets will be available sometime in December 2025. If you have any comments, questions, kudos, queries, maybe not so many concerns this week, you can email us at podcast@skeptics.nz or newsletter@skeptics.nz.
Bronwyn's just referencing the fact that I've had several concerns emailed to me in the last week, and I am at my limit of people who are unhappy with what I've done. Keep sending them if you are unhappy, but my standard response now is if you don't like what I did, write an article for me and I'll publish it with a counterpoint. So just beware that I might be trying to push some work back on you if you're unhappy with something.
Mark always loves to have a very full newsletter, so definitely if you have a complaint, put it in article form and it'll be published.
Yeah. Make it a really long complaint and I won't even ask. I'll just stick it in the newsletter.
Oh my goodness.
Alrighty, well that's it for us for this fortnight. Until next time, ka kite.
Bye.
See ya.